Welcome and thank you for tuning in. You're listening to the Beyond 50 radio program. I'm Daniel Davis. On the program today, we're going to be talking about something that probably all of us have experienced in a light way at one time or another, but certainly there are those that have suffered from it in a deep, almost suicidal sense, and that is that of depression. It is one of those illnesses that people actually have in what is known as the age of melancholy, as it's called, and we're going to discover about what depression is and other mood disorders that have been widespread in the United States as well as other Western countries. We're also going to see how we can regain hope in the face of overwhelming despair that suicidal depression, for instance, brings to some, staying well after a depressive episode to avoid relapse. But most importantly, how would we like to get away from using drugs such as Prozac, Paxil, and Zoloft that can actually cause very severe side effects that could even be worse than depression itself? We're going to find how we can heal naturally from depression and perhaps overcome this debilitating mental illness. I'd like to welcome to the Beyond 50 radio program today someone who has done just that, Mr. Douglas Block. Douglas, thank you for joining us here on the program today.
You're more than welcome.
Now, tell us your story here. What was this like for you?
Well, I've had a number of depressive episodes, or as I used to call nervous breakdowns. The one I write about in my book, Healing from Depression, occurred in 1996, 97, but I also had them in 75, 76, 82, 83, and I had a recent one just 2015, 2 years ago. Actually, now it's 3 years ago, but anyway, I was in the hospital 2 years ago, and it always started the same way. Had some sort of loss, usually, often, not always, a breakup of a relationship, which I write about I have a YouTube channel, and one of the videos says the number one cause of depression is loss of love, and then, so that got the depression going, but then I went ahead and took, at least in 1996, an antidepressant called an SSRI, like Prozac or Zoloft or Paxil, and I had a response called akathisia, which is something that they've just discovered can happen when people take these drugs. I got very anxious and restless and couldn't sit still. I was horribly agitated, and it unfortunately didn't go away, overnight. It lasted for 9 months. So I was both depressed and agitated at the same time, and I was also considered medication resistance, which means the major antidepressants didn't work for me. So, it was hell. That's why my memoir was originally called When Going Through Hell Don't Stop, because it was kind of hell. And anybody who's listening, or all the people I work with on my depression support groups, and the people who now write in from my YouTube channel and participate in my live chats, all of them who have been through this kind of suicidal depression, all agree it's a hellish state.
Now, what I'd like to know, for instance, now people think about depression, and most of the time we think of that mild feeling we have with a sense of loss. For instance, you mentioned earlier about relationships, breaking up, things like that. So
grief, yeah, that's like you say, when you lose something, attachment's grief. But depression, usually grief involves sadness. It's a natural thing. It goes away over time. When depression comes, there's something happens in the system of the brain where the circuits stop functioning, especially in something called the prefrontal cortex, and with anxiety it happens in something called the amygdala. But anyway, there are structures of the brain that are not operating properly, and it becomes, then it becomes an illness, not just a psychological thing.
So let's talk about how you went about getting treated and how that changed for you when you went and took a more holistic approach.
There was some distraction. You asked about the treatment I was getting?
Yeah, what I was asking about is how you were treating your depression and how you found a way to approach it in a more natural way. Yes.
Right. Well, as I said, the medications were not helpful. I did enter something which a lot of my clients here in Portland, Oregon do. It's called IOP, Intensive Outpatient Treatment. See, when people are depressed, the worst thing they can do, or anxious, the worst thing to do is sit around at home ruminating and being by themselves. The mind turns inward, and people become more hopeless, more desperate, more suicidal. So, I have a video called "I'd Rather Be Depressed Than Walking Around and Lying in Bed Doing Nothing." So, what an intensive outpatient program does is it gives you structure, support, and containment. So, you get up, like you're going to school or work at 9:30, and you go to this outpatient clinic where they have therapy groups or actually educational groups, on the hour with breaks for lunch, and then you have a free therapist and a free psychiatrist. It's like from 9:30 to 3:30. So it gives you a place to go, people to hang out with, and and help from therapists and psychiatrists. So I did such a program for 9 months. That's what allowed me to stay alive because the medication wasn't working. I wasn't really feeling any better, but at least I had a place to go. I was safe. I wasn't going to hurt myself. I was with other people, and and the human contact was extremely helpful, at least in terms of making sure the pain didn't get worse. So that was the first thing I did. And then I met a therapist there who was actually a recovering drug and alcohol counselor who we worked out what I called in my book, Survival Plan for Living in Hell, which is what my recovery program now. It's pretty commonsensical. It involves physical self-care, so like getting out and exercising and moving as much as you can, and diet, staying away from sugars and processed foods, which can make your mood swings worse. And then, social support, which I talked about, mental emotional self-care. This often meant that every time you have a thought like I'm never going to get better, or, it's the end of the road, why should I live, you counteract it with something like this too shall pass, and try to rebuke all your, or, change all your horrible negative thinking, because when the mind gets depressed, it sees the glass as half empty rather than half full. And then spiritual connection, well, that's what eventually saved me, was a spiritual committee I went to where people had a kind of a prayer, what we call affirmative prayer circle, where I wrote down an affirmation for my healing, and they all read it every day at 9 a.m. And somehow the collective force of the group, coming through that affirmation was simply what seemed to was a turning point. And then, so lifestyle habits was the last one, right? So structure, purpose, lots of things I write about, but essentially trying to get together some sort of a lifestyle regimen that I could do that would at least keep me afloat until, as my minister friend would say, the pattern, until the illness repatterns. In other words, fortunately, depression, even though it lasts a long time, often will, or it does, it always does change. Sometimes it needs a boost, like, drugs, or in my latter case, ECT, but and even sometimes it just changes on its own. But the point is that over time, it never stays the same. So it was like I was buying time until something happened that would get me out of this hell, and that's what all of those lifestyle habits were. They were essentially, treating, as you said, the depression naturally, not eliminating it, but at least making sure it didn't get worse and making sure I didn't kill myself.
Now, has this brought a lot of hope in the steps that you've taken for other people to perhaps even wean themselves off of those powerful drugs that are usually used?
Well, the people fall into two categories. There's one group, especially people with schizophrenia or bipolar disorder, who are on these medications, mood stabilizers, who don't wean themselves off because without them, they'd be in worse shape. And then there's other people who are getting help from them, who are depressed, who continue on them because they're not doing any harm and they seem to be doing some good. Then there's a third class who the drug is either not helping or it's giving side effects that are too unpleasant, and those are the people who wean off their drugs. But the telling of my story, both in the book and in my website and YouTube channel, whenever people hear a story about someone surviving an ordeal, they say, well, wow, if they could get through it, I could get through it. Or I'm not the only one going through this, I'm not by myself. So anytime you tell your story, whether it's getting over cancer or, heart disease or depression or surviving, being a prisoner of war, surviving famine, whatever it is, people who are going through something similar will say, well, if he could do it, maybe I can do it. So, yes, the whole thing about my story and kind of the ministry I do is it gives people help and encouragement and belief that, well, maybe I can get out of this. So, and sometimes, people do wean themselves off of drugs because they're, for many, many people, they're either not helpful or unhelpful, and oftentimes they don't. The most important point is that they have hope that somehow, some way, they'll get better and all is not lost. So that's what telling your story does, or sharing your experience. It gives other people, hope that they can come out of this. Now,
you had talked earlier about the power of understanding and kind of guiding or at least controlling your thinking and not letting your mind run loose to where you tend to follow it, that sort of a thing.
Yeah, that's called cognitive behavioral therapy, and that is used for people who are going through mild depression, people going through psychotherapy. It has a whole range of uses for all sorts of levels of illness. But yes, that's very important. I have this quote here. So I have a friend who is a very well-respected and successful attorney who decided to become a Buddhist nun. Right here in the Northwest, there's an abbey in state of Washington called Shravasti Abbey, where it's the first co-ed Buddhist abbey in America. Anyway, so she spends a lot of time there. So she sent me this quotation that says, "Ease and unease, happiness and suffering are determined by our own mind. If we are the masters of our own minds, then we shall not be bounded by any kind of circumstances." So ease and unease, happiness and suffering are determined by our mind. So the Buddhists say, well, therefore mind training is really important, because if you let your mind run loose, like you said, they call it in the East a drunken monkey. If you just let it go wherever it wants and you're not trying to tame it, then you're going to, feel up, feel down, feel right, feel left. You're just going to be all over the map. So part of therapy in general, and especially therapy with people who suffer from depression, is to try to get a hold of that. And this is why mindfulness meditation, which is taken from Buddhism, is so helpful. You focus on your breath. It just, when your mind wanders, you bring it back. It stills the mind, and then when the mind goes off, into some negative thought, you just bring it back to your breath. Or in CBT, you say, wait. Is it really true just because my coworker got fired, I'm going to get fired? Or is it really true that just because, my friend committed suicide, that I have to do the same thing? I mean, any time your mind is going into some sort of a really negative state of mind, you acknowledge it. I say cancel, which stops the pattern and the distraction, and then you replace it with some more realistic thought, or some more positive thought. So yeah, it's mastering your mind, and that's something, of course, in monastic trainings and Buddhist trainings. I mean, that's a lifetime. I mean, mastering the mind is a lifetime practice for anybody, regardless of whether they suffer from a mood disorder or not. So, but yes, in the case of depression, it's life and death, really.
So do you believe that in this day and age that we're seeing more depression?
There's a book that came out evidently from and I haven't read. There's a big interview here. There's a paper in Portland, Oregon called Street Roots. It's really interesting. It's a paper that's published by homeless people, and it's actually an amazingly good paper, and they sell it on the streets for $1. And anyway, a couple of issues ago, there was a guy named Jonathan Harry, Hari, who's a reporter, I think, for the Times or somebody, some well-known, well-regarded paper, and the title of the article and the book that just came out was "The Real Cause of Depression and What We Can Do About It." And he says that depression isn't rooted in biology, but in how we're living our lives. Well, I don't agree with him. It's based on many things. Okay, he's a London-based journalist and New York Times bestselling author. But anyway, he says that, yes, to answer your question, it's called Lost Connections, and it says that, yes, depression is getting worse, and part of it is the culture we're living in, because people are under a lot more stress. Community is not the same as it used to be, and everybody used to grow up in the same neighborhood and go to the same church and go to the same family doctor. So there's a lot more fragmentation. People are not as connected as they used to be. Isolation is something that many of my clients are experiencing. That's why when they come to a group, my group or any group, it's amazingly helpful to be among other people, other sufferers. So yeah, they say by 2020, depression will be the most disabling illness in the world. And so, yeah, there's also a lot of alienation. People don't think they have a purpose, their numbers. So, yeah, there's a lot of societal factors that are causing depression to rise. I also think that we're much more skilled at diagnosing it. Back, 200 years ago, they used to think that, they still in Nigeria think that depression is caused by demonic possession. So there's a lot more awareness, especially in teenagers and children, than when I was growing up and going to college, and there was a belief that children could not get depressed or clinically depressed. It didn't happen, which is, looking back, that's, sounds absolutely absurd. But so yeah, there's a lot of pressures, in the culture in the world that are making depression more prevalent. And also, I've been told that I don't do it a lot, but I'm not young enough. But a lot of people spend a lot of their time in social media, and I've seen articles that that can also cause depression. Often you see people who are doing wonderfully and you're not doing as well, so you feel jealous or envious or less than. And so, so even social media can, in some cases, cause a disturbance in mood.
Mm-hmm. So you were talking about demonic possession there, which brings me to the thought that you also use the power of prayer.
Well, yeah, I belong to a kind of a spiritual path in America called New Thought. It's probably most people have heard of Christian Science by Mary Baker Eddy. Well, there's a number of movements that came out of that, including Unity, which is a lovely metaphysical church based in Lee Summit, Missouri. They have churches all over the country. And so in this particular tradition, they believe very much in the power of the mind and thought. They think that, it's kind of like the law of attraction. What you think, eventually becomes manifest in your life. So if you want something and you don't just pray for it, you state it like it already exists. So you might say, thank you, Spirit, or thank you, God, for health, or thank you for abundance, or thank you for, for right relationships. And you repeat that, and it becomes infused in your mind, and then it goes into the subconscious and it manifests. So this is called affirmative prayer, where you're asking for something to happen, but you're stating it as if it already has happened. But I had done that on my own, but it wasn't very successful. But when 12 people came together with me, and we did it as a group, kind of like what happened, there was no cure for alcoholism until Bill Wilson and Bob Smith got together on June 1st, 1935, and kept each other all night and prevented each other from drinking. That's how Alcoholics Anonymous started. So they discovered right there the power of fellowship. So in my case, you took the affirmative prayer, the affirmation, I could be well, and then you combine it with a group of people all affirming the same thing. There's something that Jack Boland used to call the mastermind consciousness. Some people call it the Holy Spirit, a third force that, is the whole is greater than the sum of its parts. And that was the critical factor, the group experience plus, the prayer and the affirmative prayer, that together was what I think, and somehow, I still can't explain it 21 years later, somehow shifted something in my brain or my destiny that allowed me to get well. But yes, so not prayer in the sense that you normally think of it, please God, may this happen. It's more of a sense of affirming, in your own consciousness that this is a reality, and then waiting for reality to catch up. So I don't know if you've ever heard of the term affirmative prayer, but it's very common in things like religious science, science of mind, and unity. But it's not a mainstream concept. But the law of attraction, which is pretty popular, that's somewhat related to it. So maybe some of your listeners have heard of the law of attraction.
Yeah, we've certainly talked about that from time to time here on the program.
If you have kind of more of a metaphysical New Age bent, I'm sure people on the program have talked about that for sure.
Yeah, it's an amazing journey, that's for sure, when it comes to something like this. So do we see a lot more hope on the horizon for something like this? Well,
yes and no. I mean, they are coming out. There is something that has come recently called, I mentioned something called electroconvulsive therapy, ECT, which has gotten a really bad rap because of the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest, but it's a very powerful treatment. It's a method of last resort, and it involves inducing a grand mal seizure in the brain. It seems rather barbaric, but it only lasts for 30 seconds, and somehow it reboots the brain. People don't know how, but there's another treatment that is less invasive and for many people less scary, and it's only come out in the last 2 years. It's called transcranial magnetic stimulation, or TMS. So what they do is they run these large magnetics over your head. You don't get touched or anything, and it induces a weak electrical current in the part of your brain associated with a good mood, the prefrontal cortex, and You're not inoculated. I mean, you don't have anesthesia. There's no memory loss, which sometimes happens in ECT, you have to do it every day for 5 weeks, unfortunately. But other than that, it's pretty good. And so a number of my clients have used this, and it's been helpful where nothing else was. So there's one example of a new treatment. There's rumors about ketamine being used to treat depression, but I haven't really seen any in people I know it's done much good. But then there's this now thing called genetic testing, where they can see what type of gene mutation you have, and some drugs work better than others. So I think genetic testing could eventually lead to some sort of improvements in targeting the right antidepressant for the right person. But of course, antidepressants themselves are very crude. No one really knows how they work. It's really trial and error. So we're still in the dark ages to some extent in terms of getting good treatments for depression. But things like TMS and things like genetic testing, I think the most important thing about treating depression, of course, is diagnosing it early and make sure people get help before it gets really bad. And unfortunately, I think our mental health system could be a better job of that. And a lot of people's insurance doesn't cover certain doctors or counselors, or they're not on the panel. And some people who work for themselves, like me, it's very difficult to get really inexpensive insurance. So I think things, overall are getting better, but there's still a lot of people who don't get access to the treatment they need, and a lot of these medications, like you said, are just not helpful to probably at least 1/3 of the people who try them out. So, but overall, I would say that at least people are becoming more aware of the problem, and there's more empathy. Some of my clients, and even my nephew, who've had bad cases of depression, have been able to take off of work and not get fired because the boss is understanding, and they realize they're not lazy or weak. Their brain's not functioning. Like if someone had cancer or was in the hospital for major heart surgery, you wouldn't ask them to go to work. Well, with depression now, people are understanding that it's as debilitating as some of these other things, and it's okay to take a leave of absence if you need to. So I don't know. I in my groups that I've been running for 17 years, I see that when people get the right kind of support and they're motivated to get well, they do get well. So I do believe that depression is something that can be treated, and that people do come out of it and can come out of it, and there's no such thing as a hopeless case. So on the individual level, I think there is hope. I tell people who contact me who are desperate, I said, I know you feel desperate. I know you feel like things will never get better, but they will, trust me. So on the individual front, I'm hopeful. But like this new book said, society has a lot of pressures on people that make it difficult for them to heal, and so there's it's definitely remains a major problem.
Yeah. So is there a website people can find out more about your work?
Yes, there's two things. One is my website on depression, which is pretty easy to remember. It's simply healingfromdepression.com. That's my website for depression. And the other thing that seems to be much more popular these days in the days of video is my YouTube channel, and it's I can give you two ways. First of all, it's youtube.com/user/healing depression. That's the exact URL. Or you can just go to youtube.com and you can just type in the words Douglas Bloch, B-L-O-C-H. That's my last name, ends with an H. Like building block, but an H. Douglas Bloch Depression Recovery, or just Douglas Bloch Depression, and you'll be taken right to my channel if you just put those words in the YouTube search bar. So the website and the YouTube channel are the two main ways I get at information. I do have a Patreon site where people can go in if they want to help fund the channel, because it costs money to make videos, and it's you don't get a whole lot of payment from advertisers, especially since when I make videos about suicide depression, YouTube doesn't choose to monetize them. Something about the word suicide, they think it'll scare advertisers off. So. But the main thing is healingfromdepression.com for the website, and YouTube, just go and type in Douglas Bloch Depression, and you'll find my channel there.
Well, thank you so much for being on the program today.
Well, thank you for your excellent questions. Are there people to write in and ask questions? Should I give out my email address in case someone has a personal question or not?
They'll probably be able to get you through your website that you just gave us.
Okay, so yeah, just go to healingfromdepression.com. There's a contact button like there is on all websites, and if someone has any particular questions, just click on contact and has my contact information. But yeah,
Very good.
healingfromdepression.com should give a lot of good information. I appreciate the opportunity to share this with the audience. And if I had to say one thing before I go, and that is simply never give up. Never give up. Never give up. No matter how bad it feels or how hopeless you may feel, there is recovery. And if you just reach out for support and even pray about it, something will be attracted to you, and you'll be able to get better. So just
very good.
Hang in there.
Thank you so much, Douglas.
We'll get better. Thank you so much for the interview. I really appreciate it.
You bet. I want to thank you listeners out there for tuning in. You can also discover more. Visit us at beyond50radio.com. That is the number 50. We do encourage you to sign up for our free weekly e-newsletter and keep up to date with what's going on in the world of Beyond 50 as well as our upcoming shows. Thank you again for joining us. I'm Daniel Davis, and remember, live your day past halfway.